city of Hazor. Who's heard of Hazor before, apart from when I mentioned it yesterday?
No.
That's, well, a couple of people. That's quite impressive. I'd never heard of it before I came here. It's quite an old city. It's not as old as Megiddo, but it's still very old. And it's still on that same trade route that leads from Egypt up to the civilizations of the north and the northeast. So Syria, and you have a place called Mari. So you would have to travel through here going up there. So it was a very affluent city. And in fact, if you read in, we can read in Joshua that it's called, it says in Joshua 11 verse 10 that Hazor had been the head of all these kingdoms. So it was clearly an important city in Canaan. Now when the archaeologists found Hazor, they were quite confused at first because they thought it was a city with sort of a large place for chariots, or rather a sort of a chariot place for chariots with a city. But in fact it was a massive city, and it was a lot bigger than any of the other cities in this region, and a lot bigger than people thought that it would be. In fact, it was 10 to 15 times the size of the surrounding cities of Canaan. So it's a lot bigger. And where was I going with that? Yeah, so it was a city of about 30,000 people. It's quite large, obviously not as large as the cities that we have today, but by for that time it was still a very large city, and it covered about 200 acres. So it's a very large city. Now, the Israelites came here during the conquest, and we read in Joshua 11 of how Joshua captured the city and burnt it. Let's read from Joshua 11. When Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of this, that Joshua had come, he sent word to Jobab, king of Madon, to the kings of Shimron and Akshaph, and to the northern kings who were in the mountains, in the Arba south of Kinnereth, in the western foothills, and in Naphoth Dor of the west, to the Canaanites in the east and the west, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites in the hill country, and to the Hivites below Hermon in the region of Mitzpah. They came out with all their troops and a large number of horses and chariots, a huge army, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. All these kings joined forces and made camp together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them slain over to Israel. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots." And this is not a kind of sort of animal torture, but it's really to make sure that these weren't used as machines of war, which they were. So it might sound brutal, but it's a precaution just to make sure that it's not used as a machine of war. So Joshua and his whole army came against them suddenly at the waters of Merom and attacked them, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. They defeated them and pursued them all the way to Greater Sidon, to Mizrapoth Maim, and to the valley of Mitzpah on the east, until no survivors were left. Joshua did to them as the Lord had directed. He hamstrung their horses and burnt their chariots. At that time Joshua turned back and captured Hazor and put its king to the sword. Hazor had been the head of all these kingdoms. Everyone in it they put to the sword. They totally destroyed them, not sparing anyone that breathed, and he burnt Hazor itself. So the Israelites, a fairly insignificant people, if you will, a sort of smaller culture, came and conquered this absolutely massive place. And we're going to walk further and see some evidence of how this smaller culture had taken over this massive place. Let's head on this way.
You know what people say today that God did these things in the past? How can you explain that in a time frame? Why God would not do that today?
How do you mean?
Well, why does God not do the same thing today? Why does he not take that action today? Why was it back then?
We read in the Bible how